In structural engineering, we call it metal fatigue. It is a tiny, invisible crack under glossy paint that spreads silently until the building collapses. Julian, my stepson, thought I was a dilapidated structure waiting for demolition. He gave me a tablet for my 68th birthday, believing it would help him bury me. But he forgot I spent a lifetime reinforcing weak foundations. 11 days. That is all the time I needed to turn his gift into the evidence that sent him to prison. My name is Charles Smith. In the discipline of structural engineering, we adhere to a fundamental concept known as the dead load. It is the permanent, immovable weight of the structure itself, the concrete, the steel, the walls, and the floors. It is the burden a building must bear simply to exist before a single person steps inside or a single gust of wind strikes the glass. You calculate the dead load first, because if a structure cannot support its own weight, it has no business standing at all. For the past 3 years since my wife Margaret passed away, my dead load has been silence. It is a heavy static force that fills every corner of my penthouse on the 42nd floor of the Marina Towers in Chicago. I woke up on the morning of October 24th, my 68th birthday, and felt that familiar weight pressing down on my chest. I did not fight it. I simply calculated the necessary resistance, rose from my bed, and began my day. My apartment is a testament to my life's work. It is clean, minimalist, and precise. Every object has a coordinate. The morning light hit the quartz countertop in the kitchen at exactly 7 in the morning, illuminating my single cup of black coffee and the unread newspaper. I have lived my life by blueprints. I understand that stability comes from predictability. But as I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling steel grid of Chicago, a city I had helped hold up for 40 years, I knew that predictability was a luxury I could no longer afford. The day was supposed to be a milestone, a celebration of longevity. Instead, it felt like a structural inspection I was destined to fail. The only scheduled event on my calendar was a visit from Julian. Julian. He is not my blood. He is the son of Margaret's first marriage, a boy I inherited when he was 12 years old. I call him a boy, though he is now 32, because he has never quite solidified into a man. He lacks the tensile strength required for adulthood. When Margaret was dying, her skin paper-thin and her voice barely a whisper, she gripped my hand with a force that surprised me. "Promise me, Charles," she had said. "He is drifting. You have to be his anchor. Promise me you won't let him sink." I promised. It was a contract I intended to honor, even though Julian made it difficult. He was a man of surfaces, flashy suits, leased luxury cars, and a career in high-end real estate that seemed to consist mostly of posting photos of champagne toasts on social media rather than actually closing deals. He was all facade with no load-bearing walls behind the smile. The intercom buzzed at noon sharp. I pressed the button to let him up, smoothing the front of my cardigan. I checked my reflection in the hallway mirror. I looked like what I was, a retired engineer who valued function over form. My hair was white and close-cropped, my posture rigid. I was a relic of an analog age waiting for a digital visitor. When Julian stepped out of the elevator, the first thing I noticed was the smell of expensive cologne, masking the scent of stale tobacco. He was wearing a navy suit that was cut too tight in the modern style, exposing his ankles. He grinned, his teeth white and perfect, but the smile did not reach his eyes. "Happy birthday, Dad," he announced, his voice booming a little too loudly for the quiet room. He stepped forward and embraced me. I stiffened. The term "Dad" always felt like a borrowed coat on him, ill-fitting and temporary. He only wore it when he needed something. As he patted my back, I felt a tremor in his hand. It was a micro-vibration, the kind you feel on a suspension bridge, just before the wind shear becomes critical. He was vibrating with anxiety. "Thank you, Julian," I said, stepping back to create a safe distance. "You didn't have to come all this way." "Nonsense," he said, moving past me into the living room. His eyes darted around the space, scanning the furniture, the art on the walls, the view. It was a surveyor's gaze, calculating value, not appreciating aesthetics. You are 68 today. The big 6'8". We have to celebrate. He was carrying a sleek, flat box wrapped in silver paper. He placed it on the coffee table as if it were a holy relic. I got you something, he said. I know you are still using that ancient laptop that weighs 20 pounds. It is time for an upgrade. I looked at the box. I have never been fond of surprises. In construction, a surprise usually means a cost overrun or a catastrophic failure. Julian, I don't need... Just open it, he interrupted his fingers, tapping a nervous rhythm against his thigh. Tap, tap, tap. A chaotic frequency. I sat down and carefully peeled back the paper. Inside was a tablet. It was the latest model, the kind that cost more than $1,000. The screen was a vast expanse of black glass. It felt heavy in my hands, denser than I expected. It is top of the line, Julian said, watching my face closely. Cellular data included, so you don't even need Wi-Fi. And the best part, I already set it up for you. I paused, my hand hovering over the power button. You set it up. Yeah, he said, laughing a little too breathlessly. I know how you hate passwords and configuration screens. I created an account, downloaded all the apps you need, news, weather, stocks. I even set up a folder for your banking so you can manage your retirement funds without driving to the branch. My engineer's brain triggered a warning light. In my profession, we do not accept black boxes. We need to see the schematics. We need to know where the load paths go. When a contractor tells you, they have already covered up the wiring behind the drywall, so you don't have to inspect it. That is when you tear the wall down. That was considerate of you, I said, choosing my words with the care of placing explosives for a controlled demolition. But I prefer to manage my own security settings. Oh, come on, Charles, he said, waving a hand dismissively. I am just trying to help. You are getting older. Technology moves fast. I wanted to make sure you were connected. Connected to me. Connected to the world. He emphasized the word connected. It hung in the air like smoke. Let's have lunch, I said, placing the tablet back on the table. I did not turn it on. Not yet. I had prepared a simple meal, roast beef sandwiches and a salad. We sat at the dining table, the silence between us, filled by the scrape of silverware on china. Julian ate quickly, tearing into the sandwich as if he hadn't eaten in days. I noticed a small stain on his silk tie, an imperfection in his carefully curated image. So, he said, swallowing a large bite. How are the markets treating you? I saw the S&P 500 took a dip last week. I am in low-risk bonds, Julian. You know that. I don't chase the market. Right. Conservative. Smart. He wiped his mouth with a napkin, his eyes fixed on my face. But with inflation, the way it is, those bonds are practically losing value, aren't they? Have you thought about diversifying? Maybe putting some of the trust into real estate? I have some listings in the West Loop that are going to double in value by next year. There it was. The live load. The variable force that changes over time. Julian's financial desperation was a live load that was testing the limits of his integrity. The trust is locked, Julian, I said calmly. It is for your future and for the grandchildren. I hope you will give me one day. It is not for speculation. He flinched. The mention of the future seemed to pain him. I know. I am just saying. You are sitting on a lot of equity here. And with your pension and the insurance payout from Mom, it is a lot for one person to manage. Alone. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a register of faux concern. I worry about you, Dad. Being all alone up here, it is easy to miss things, forget things. Maybe pay a bill twice or forget to file a tax document. It happens to the best of people at your age. I looked at him. I saw the sweat beading on his upper lip. I saw the way his pupils were slightly dilated. He was terrified. He wasn't worried about my memory. He was banking on my decline. He was trying to gaslight me, to plant a crack in my own perception of my mental stability. "My memory is fine, Julian," I said, my voice steel. I can still calculate the sheer stress of a steel beam in my head. "I think I can manage my electric bill." He forced a laugh, leaning back. "Of course. I didn't mean to offend you. I want to make sure you are protected." Before I could respond, his phone buzzed on the table. It wasn't a ringtone. It was a harsh, insistent vibration. Julian glanced at the screen, and the blood drained from his face. It was instantaneous, like a light switch being flipped. The confident real estate mogul vanished, replaced by a scared child. He snatched the phone up. I have to take this. It is a client. A big closing." He stood up, nearly knocking over his chair. "I am so sorry, Dad. I have to go. It is an emergency." "On a Sunday?" I asked. "Real estate never sleeps," he muttered, already moving toward the door. He didn't even finish his sandwich. "Happy birthday, okay. Enjoy the tablet, use it. Call me on it." And then he was gone. The heavy oak door clicked shut, sealing the penthouse once again. I stood by the window and watched the street below. Minutes later, I saw a tiny figure emerge from the building and scramble into a silver BMW. He didn't pull out smoothly. He jerked the car into traffic, cutting off a taxi, driving with the desperation of a man being hunted. I returned to the living room. The apartment was quiet again, but the air felt different. It felt contaminated. My eyes fell on the silver box on the coffee table. The gift. I sat down in my leather armchair and picked up the tablet. It was cool to the touch. I pressed the power button. The screen flared to life, bypassing the usual setup wizard. It went straight to a home screen that felt alien. The icons were large, comically, so as if designed for a toddler or someone with severe visual impairment. Bank, photos, email, video call. There were no other apps. No browser, no settings icon visible on the main page. It was a walled garden, a prison yard disguised as a playground. "I set it up for you," he had said. I tapped the icon labeled bank. I expected it to ask for my username. Instead, it opened a login screen that had my username already pre-filled. All it waited for was the password. How did he have my username? I felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck. I had never given Julian my banking credentials. I kept them in a physical ledger in my safe, a habit from a time before the cloud. Unless he had found the ledger during one of his previous visits. I did not type the password. Instead, I just held the device. And then I noticed it. Heat. It started at the center of the back casing and radiated outward. Modern electronics get warm when they are under a heavy load processing high-definition video or rendering complex 3D graphics. But this tablet was doing nothing. It was displaying a static login page. Why was the processor running at full capacity? I brought the screen closer to my face. The display was crisp, high resolution. But as I tilted it, I saw the tiny dark circle of the front-facing camera lens staring back at me. It looked like the barrel of a gun. In engineering, we talk about thermal expansion. When materials heat up, they change shape. If you don't leave room for that expansion, the structure tears itself apart. This tablet was burning energy. It was working hard. It wasn't waiting for me to input data. It was already transmitting it. I placed the tablet down on the cold marble of the coffee table. The contrast between the hot metal of the device and the cool stone was jarring. I stared at it for a long time as the sun began to set over Chicago, casting long, bruised shadows across my floor. The dead load of my life had shifted. It was no longer just the grief of losing Margaret. It was something active, something malignant. Julian thought he had given me a window to the world. He didn't realize he had handed me a specimen. He thought I was a crumbling foundation, weak and porous. He forgot that before a building collapses, it speaks. The rivets groan, the concrete hairline cracks, the steel yields. I looked at the sleek, black device sitting on my table. To anyone else, it was a generous gift from a loving stepson. But I looked at it with the eyes of a man who had spent 40 years inspecting compromised structures. I didn't see a computer. I saw a piece of rusty rebar protruding from a cracked column, bleeding corrosion into the concrete, warning anyone who knew how to look that the collapse was imminent. The heat radiating from the device was the friction of betrayal. And unlike the buildings I used to save, I wasn't sure I wanted to reinforce this relationship. I wanted to see exactly how much stress it could take before it snapped. I sat there in the darkening room, the city lights flickering on below me, and formulated a plan to test the structural integrity of my own family. The dead load was heavy, yes, but I was still the engineer, and I was about to conduct the most rigorous stress test of my life. If a suspension cable on a bridge is going to fail, it rarely snaps all at once without warning. First, individual wire strands give way inside the casing. You cannot see them breaking, but you can measure the redistribution of tension if you have the right instruments. The bridge starts to sag imperceptibly at first, then undeniably. 2 days after my 68th birthday, I began to notice the wire strands snapping inside my new tablet. The first anomaly was a simple matter of energy conservation. In engineering, efficiency is the ratio of useful work performed to the total energy expended. On the morning of October 26th, I woke up at my usual time of 5:30 to find the tablet dead. I had charged it to 100% before going to bed at 10 the previous night. It had sat on my nightstand untouched, unconnected, to a charger supposedly in sleep mode. I plugged it in, watching the battery icon flicker from red to white. A device in standby mode should consume perhaps 2 or 3% of its battery life overnight. This machine had devoured a full charge in 7 hours, while doing absolutely nothing. Or rather, while doing nothing that I could see. Where did that energy go? Energy does not disappear. It transforms. It had been converted into heat and data transmission. While I slept, the device had been working a double shift. Once it powered on, I decided to investigate the communication logs. Julian had set up an email account for me, claiming it was for easy updates from him. I opened the mail application. The inbox was empty, save for a welcome message from the service provider. But my finger hovered over the sent folder. Logic dictated it should be empty. I had not written to anyone. I tapped the glass. There was one item in the outbox time-stamped at 3:15 in the morning. I opened it. The recipient was not a recognizable email address, but a chaotic string of alphanumeric characters that looked more like a serial number than a destination. The subject line was blank. The body of the email contained no words, just a block of code, bracketed numbers, slashes, and randomized letters. It looked like the raw data output from a seismograph. I stared at the screen. My stomach tightened, not with fear, but with the cold, hard realization of a violation. My device was speaking a language I did not understand to a person I did not know in the middle of the night. I needed a control variable. I needed to test the device in a neutral environment away from my home Wi-Fi to see if the behavior persisted. I dressed in my gray wool coat and walked 3 blocks to a small coffee shop I frequented on Wabash Avenue. It was a noisy place, filled with a clatter of porcelain and the hiss of espresso machines, a chaotic acoustic environment. I sat in a corner booth and placed the tablet on the table. I did not turn it on. I just let it sit there dark and dormant. The waitress, a young woman named Sarah, who knew my order by heart, approached with a pot of coffee. "Good morning, Mr. Smith," she said brightly. "Just the usual today." "Yes, thank you, Sarah," I replied. "And perhaps a blueberry muffin." At the sound of my voice, the tablet screen flared to life. I froze. I had not touched it. The table had not vibrated enough to trigger a motion sensor. The device had woken up the moment I spoke the words, "blueberry muffin." The screen glowed with a pulsating blue circle in the center, a visual representation of a listening mode before quickly fading back to the home screen, as if realizing its mistake. It was not just listening, it was keyword scanning. It was hunting for triggers. I left the coffee shop without ordering. I walked home with the tablet wrapped inside my newspaper, holding it away from my body, as if it were a piece of radioactive isotope. I did not return to my penthouse immediately. I stopped at a payphone. Yes, they still exist in Chicago, if you know where to look, but the receiver was broken. I needed a secure line. I went back to my apartment, but I did not take the tablet out of the newspaper. I placed it inside the microwave in my kitchen and closed the door. The microwave is essentially a Faraday cage. Its metal mesh screen blocks electromagnetic fields. If the tablet was transmitting, the microwave would stifle its signal. I walked to my study and looked at the landline phone on my mahogany desk. It was a heavy, corded model I had kept for sentimental reasons. It was analog. It was copper wire. It could be tapped certainly, but it could not be hacked by a piece of malware sitting in my kitchen. I dialed a number I had not called in 5 years. Ironclad Solutions. This is the front desk. I am looking for Marcus Thorne, I said. Tell him it is Charles Smith. Tell him I have a structural integrity issue. There was a pause and then a transfer click. Professor. The voice was deeper than I remembered, but the respect was still there. Marcus had been one of my brightest students in civil engineering before he realized his passion lay in the architecture of code rather than concrete. He had pivoted to cybersecurity and founded Ironclad, a firm that specialized in digital forensics. Hello, Marcus, I said. I apologize for the abruptness. I have a situation that requires your specific set of tools. I believe I have been compromised. Compromised? How? Financial identity theft? Surveillance, I said. Physical and digital. Can I come to you now? My office is on West Randolph. I will clear my schedule. I took a cab to his office. I did not want to drive my own car, fearing the GPS might be linked to whatever ecosystem Julian had trapped me in. I carried the tablet wrapped in aluminum foil inside my briefcase. It felt ridiculous, paranoid, like the behavior of a man losing his grip on reality. But in my line of work, paranoia is just another word for thoroughness. Ironclad Solutions looked less like an office and more like a command bunker. The air was frigid, kept cool to protect the racks of servers that lined the glass-walled corridors. It hummed with a low, constant vibration, the sound of data moving at light speed. Marcus met me at the security checkpoint. He was 40 now, a tall man with sharp, intelligent eyes, behind rimless glasses. He wore a black t-shirt and jeans, the uniform of the modern tech sector, but he shook my hand with the firm grip of a man who used to pour concrete. Good to see you, Charles, he said, ushering me into a private lab at the back of the facility. You said on the phone it was urgent. I received a gift, I said, placing my briefcase on the steel table. From my stepson. I believe it is a Trojan horse. I unwrapped the tablet. Marcus looked at it, then at me. He did not laugh. He did not tell me I was imagining things. He knew me too well. He knew that if I said a beam was cracking, I had already calculated the stress factors. Let's put it in the sandbox, Marcus said. He gestured to a workstation separated from the rest of the network. It was an isolated system, an air-gapped environment designed to detonate digital bombs safely. He connected the tablet to his diagnostic tower, using a cable that allowed him to monitor the traffic without letting the device connect to the internet. I am bypassing the operating system, Marcus explained, his fingers flying across a mechanical keyboard. I am going to look at the kernel level. If there is something nasty in there, it will try to call home the moment it senses a connection. He activated a simulated network, a fake internet, that would trick the tablet into thinking it was online. The main monitor on the wall suddenly spiked with red, jagged lines. Whoa, Marcus whispered. What is it? I asked, leaning closer. Traffic, he said. Massive amounts of it. Look at the upload speed. Numbers scrolled down the screen faster than I could read. It is dumping the cache, Marcus interpreted. Browser history, location, data, microphone logs. It is trying to empty everything it has stored since you put it in the microwave. Can you see what it is sending? It is encrypted, Marcus said, his brow furrowing. AES 256 encryption. This is not commercial spyware, Charles. You cannot buy this on the App Store to track your teenager. This is military grade, or at least very expensive black market grade. He typed a command, isolating one of the data packets. I can't read the content yet, he said, but I can analyze the behavior. Look at this. He pointed to a recurring spike on the graph. Every 5 seconds, a heartbeat signal. It is checking for instructions. Instructions from whom? From the command and control server. C&C. Marcus stopped typing. He turned to look at me, his face grave. Charles, you said your stepson gave you this. Is he a coder? Does he work for the NSA? He is a real estate agent, I said dryly. He sells condos. Then he paid someone a lot of money for this, Marcus said. This is a rootkit. It has administrative privileges higher than the user. It controls the hardware at a level you cannot even see. It can turn on the GPS even if you switch it off in the settings. It can record audio even when the device is asleep. I felt a cold anger settling in my chest. It was the same feeling I had when I inspected a building in '98 and found the contractors had substituted cheap sand in the concrete mix. It was the anger of discovering structural dishonesty. Can you trace it? I asked. I can try to triangulate the IP address it is trying to reach, Marcus said. But the scarier part is not where it is going. It is what it is doing right now. He pointed to a specific line of code that was flashing yellow on his monitor. Video, he said. What? The camera driver is active, Marcus said. His voice dropped to a whisper. The little green light next to the lens, the one that tells you the camera is on, this software has disabled the physical LED. The camera is rolling, but the light is off. I looked down at the black slab on the table. It looked innocent, inert. So, I said slowly, if we were on a real network, they would be seeing us, Marcus finished. High definition, 60 frames per second. But we are in your sandbox, I noted. So they see nothing. They see a black screen, Marcus corrected, because I have blocked the video feed. But the audio. Charles, the microphone does not need a driver light. He slammed his hand down on the enter key, severing the connection instantly. The screens went flat. The red spikes vanished. The silence in the server room was deafening. Marcus stood up and walked over to the tablet. He picked up a piece of black electrical tape and placed it over the front and rear cameras. Then he looked at me, and for the first time since I had known him as a 19-year-old undergraduate, I saw fear in his eyes. It is not a defect, Charles, he said. It is a weapon. And whoever is on the other end wasn't just waiting for you to use your banking app. They were waiting for you to talk. They are building a profile. Voice, face, location, habits. He paused, looking around his own secure facility, as if the walls had ears. You said you brought this here because you suspected something, Marcus said. You were right. But we have a bigger problem now. What is that? The moment I plugged this into the sandbox, the software tried to handshake with the server. It failed because I blocked it. But the server knows the attempt was made. It knows the device is online but refusing to send video. He looked at the taped-up lens. Whoever is watching you, Charles. They know you have stopped broadcasting. They know something is wrong. And right now, through the microphone buffer before I cut the feed, they might have heard us analyzing them. I looked at the device. It was no longer a gift. It was a hostage negotiator, and the negotiations had just failed. Then, we have to move fast, I said. Because if Julian knows, I know he will panic. And a panicked man is as dangerous as a collapsing roof. Marcus nodded. You need to see exactly where this data is going. I am going to tear this code apart. But Charles, do not take this thing back to your home unshielded. From this moment on, assume every word you say near it is being recorded for a court case against you. No, I said, a plan forming in the blueprints of my mind. Not a court case against me, Marcus. A court case against him. I looked at the blank screen, seeing my own reflection distorted in the glass. Turn it back on, I said. Marcus stared at me. What? Connect it again. Let the video remain blocked, but open the audio channel. Let them hear us. Charles, that is dangerous. I am an engineer, Marcus. I don't avoid stress. I manage it. If they are listening, let's give them something to hear. Let's make them think the device is malfunctioning, not that I have discovered them. Marcus hesitated, then nodded slowly. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. You want to feed them garbage data? I want to feed them a distraction, I said. While you trace the signal back to the source, can you do that? If you keep the line open long enough, Marcus said. I can trace a packet through hell itself. Good, I said. Then let's get to work. Open the line. He typed a command. The graph spiked red again. The invisible eye opened. The invisible ear pricked up. I leaned in close to the microphone of the tablet, visualizing my stepson's face, and spoke with the confused, frustrated tremor of an old man struggling with technology. Hello? I shouted at the device, tapping it clumsily. Is this thing working? I can't see the screen properly. Stupid machine. Maybe I should call Julian. I looked at Marcus. He was already typing furiously, tracking the signal as it bounced off satellites and servers, hunting for the predator that was hunting me. The game had begun. The performance ended as abruptly as a guillotine drop. Marcus slammed his fingers onto the keyboard, executing a kill command that severed the connection logic we had briefly allowed to run. He did not stop there. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a roll of copper tape and a heavy, putty-like substance. With the precision of a surgeon, he sealed the microphone ports and the camera lenses, layering physical barriers over the digital ones. Okay, Marcus exhaled, the tension in his shoulders releasing slightly. We are dark again. The line is cut. To whoever is on the other end, it looks like your Wi-Fi signal just dropped out. A common occurrence for a confused senior citizen. He turned his chair to face the main monitor, where the code from the tablet was now dissected and displayed like the anatomy of a cadaver. Now, he said, his voice hardening. Let us see exactly what we are dealing with. He ran a signature analysis on the malware kernel. The screen flooded with lines of red text, cross-referencing the code against a global database of known cyber threats. It took less than a minute for the system to find a match. A skull icon flashed on the screen, followed by the name Ghost View Enterprise. I suspected as much, Marcus muttered. What is Ghost View? I asked, leaning against the cold steel table. It is a remote administration tool, or RAT, Marcus explained, turning to face me. But this is not the kind of thing you use to fix your grandmother's printer. Ghost View is strictly black market. It is sold on invite-only forums on the dark web. It costs about $4,000 for a 6-month license, and it is marketed specifically to organized crime syndicates for blackmail, corporate espionage, and recovering debts from high-risk borrowers. $4,000, I repeated. The number hung in the air. Julian was constantly complaining about money, yet he had invested $4,000 to spy on me. That was not an expense. It was a capital investment. He expected a return. What can it do? I asked. Marcus pointed to the list of active modules on the screen. Everything. It is a total panopticon, Charles. It has a keylogger, which means every letter you type passwords, emails, search queries is sent to them in real time. It has a GPS tracker accurate to within 3 feet. It records ambient audio 24 hours a day, compressing the files and uploading them whenever the device finds a connection. And this. He highlighted a line of code that read, SCRNCAP_INT_5000. It automatically takes a high-resolution screenshot of whatever is on your display every 5 seconds. If you open a bank statement, they have it. If you read a private letter, they read it with you. If you look at photos of your late wife, they are watching you do it. I felt a wave of nausea, a physical revulsion at the invasion. It was like finding out someone had installed one-way glass in my bathroom. But as an engineer, I learned long ago that emotion is a poor substitute for analysis. Panic causes structures to fail. Calculation saves them. I forced the bile down and locked my knees. "Trace it," I commanded. My voice was steady, the voice I used when ordering a site evacuation due to structural instability. Marcus nodded. "I am already on it." The signal we just intercepted was bouncing through 3 different proxy servers, one in Estonia, one in Panama, and one in Singapore. That is standard for Ghostview. It tries to wash the IP address, so you cannot find the operator. But you can find them. "I can," Marcus said, his fingers flying across the keys. "Because whoever configured this made a mistake. A lazy mistake. When the device establishes a handshake with the command server, it requests a validation token from the administrator's device. It is a security feature to ensure only the person who paid for the software can access the feed." He pulled up a map of Chicago. A radar-like circle began to pulse, narrowing its search radius. "The administrator is not using a desktop computer," Marcus said, his eyes glued to the data stream. "They are using a mobile device, an iPhone 13 Pro, and they are not in Estonia." The circle on the map tightened. It zoomed in on the downtown loop, then shifted slightly north, hovering over the River North District. It locked onto a specific coordinate. "The device receiving your data is registered to an Apple ID," Marcus said. "The ID is linked to a corporate email address, CEO@prestigeglobalrealty.com. I closed my eyes. Prestige Global Realty. It was the shell company Julian had started 2 years ago. A company with no employees, no listings, and an office address that turned out to be a rented mailbox in a UPS store. "It is Julian," I said. "There is no doubt. There is more," Marcus said. He did not look triumphant. He looked worried. "I am looking at the payload, the specific scripts he preloaded onto the tablet before he gave it to you. Charles, this isn't just surveillance. It is an access tunnel." He opened a new window. It showed a list of applications that had been granted super user status permissions that override all security protocols. "He has pre-authenticated the tablet with 3 major banking apps and your brokerage firm," Marcus said. "He must have had your login credentials from somewhere else." "He has been in my house," I said. "He knows where I keep my ledger." "Well, he used them," Marcus continued. "But here is the catch. He did not just log in. He set this tablet up as a trusted device for 2-factor authentication. Do you know what that means? Tell me." "It means if he tries to change the password on your retirement account from his own phone, the bank will send a verification code to this tablet. And since Ghostview reads your screen every 5 seconds, he will see that code instantly. He can lock you out of your own life without ever stepping foot in your apartment. He has admin access to your existence." The gravity of the situation settled on me like a concrete slab. This was not just a son trying to see if his old man was spending his inheritance. This was a hostile takeover. Julian was not waiting for me to die. He was preparing to liquidate me while I was still breathing. I walked over to the window of the server room. The glass was cool against my forehead. I looked out at the alleyway, seeing the brickwork of the adjacent building. I analyzed the mortar joints, the stress fractures in the masonry. For 30 years I had loved Julian. I had paid for his private schools. I had bought him his first car. I had paid his legal fees when he got into a bar fight in his 20s. I had held him when his mother died, promising her that he would never be alone. And he had repaid that love by turning me into a resource to be mined. I turned back to Marcus. The grief was gone. In its place was the cold, hard clarity of a demolition expert. "We are going to fix this," I said. "I can wipe the device right now," Marcus offered. "I can brick it. He will never receive another byte of data. We can go to the police with this log." "No," I said. "If we stop the feed now, he will know he has been caught. He will run. He will destroy the evidence on his end, delete the servers, throw that iPhone into the Chicago River. And I will be left with a story that sounds like the ramblings of a senile old man." I walked back to the table and looked down at the tablet. "He thinks I am a confused pensioner who can barely operate a touchscreen," I said. "He thinks this device is his eyes and ears. So we are going to let him keep seeing, but we are going to choose what he sees." Marcus tilted his head. "You want to sandbox the physical device? Can you create a contained environment?" I asked. "A layer of software that sits between his spyware and the real operating system. I want to be able to use the tablet, but I want every piece of data leaving it to be filtered. If I open my bank account, I want him to see a fake balance. If I type an email, I want to approve whether it gets sent to his keylogger or not." Marcus grinned. It was a sharp, predatory grin. "You want a localized man-in-the-middle attack. You want to feed him a simulation." "Exactly," I said. "He wants to watch a reality show. Let's give him a scripted drama. I need to act normal. I need to make him believe his plan is working perfectly. I need to lure him out into the open." "I can do that," Marcus said, cracking his knuckles. "I can install a hypervisor. It will virtualize the OS. To Ghost View, it will look like business as usual. But you will have a secondary control panel, a God mode, hidden under a gesture command. You can toggle the microphone on and off, but feed him looped audio of a quiet room when it is off. You can let him see the screen, or you can feed him a static image." "How long will it take?" "Give me 2 hours," Marcus said. "I need to rewrite the kernel permissions so GhostView doesn't realize it has been demoted." "Do it," I said. "And, Marcus, I need you to extract everything found on that tablet. Every IP address, every timestamp, every line of code. I need a forensic report that will stand up in a federal court." "You will have it," Marcus promised. "But Charles, are you sure you can do this? You have to go back home with that thing. You have to live with a spy in your pocket. One slip up, one moment where you drop the act, and he will know." I buttoned my coat. "I spent 40 years walking on steel beams 500 feet in the air, Marcus. I know how to keep my balance." 2 hours later, I walked out of Ironclad Solutions. The tablet was in my bag, humming with its new secret programming. Marcus had done his work. Now it was time for me to do mine. I sat in my car looking up at the skyline. I spotted the Willis Tower, a structure of bundled tubes designed to withstand the immense wind loads of the Windy City. It stood tall because its core was solid. Julian had made a fatal miscalculation. He thought the cracks he saw in me were structural failures. He did not understand that they were expansion joints designed to allow movement without breaking. I started the engine. The sun was setting, painting the sky in bruises of purple and red. "Everything that collapses starts from the foundation," I whispered to the empty car. "You dug the hole, Julian. Now I am going to pour the concrete." I drove back to the penthouse, the tablet sitting on the passenger seat, like a loaded gun. I was going home to play the role of a lifetime. The victim, the fool, the prey, and Julian, watching from his screen in River North, would never see the trap closing until the steel jaws snapped shut. In civil engineering, before we reinforce a crumbling structure, we must perform a foundation audit. We cannot simply patch the cracks in the walls. We have to dig down to the bedrock to understand why the earth is shifting beneath us. I knew the what Julian was spying on me. I knew the how, the compromised tablet. Now I needed the why. Greed is a powerful motivator, but the urgency of Julian's actions, the sheer recklessness of using military-grade spyware, suggested something more volatile than simple avarice. It suggested panic. I did not go to the police yet. The police deal in crimes that have already been committed. I was dealing with a crime in progress, a structural failure that was happening in real time. I needed information, not a case number. I contacted Sam Miller. Miller was a former homicide detective who had pivoted to private investigations after a disagreement with the city regarding his pension. He operated out of a small, smoke-stained office in Uptown, a place that smelled of old paper and cheap coffee. We had worked together years ago when I needed background checks on contractors for a sensitive government project. He was thorough, expensive, and entirely discreet. I met him at a diner on Western Avenue, leaving the tablet at home plugged into the charger in the living room, its camera lens covered by a forgetful stack of books, but its microphone left open to record the silence of an empty apartment. Miller slid a manila envelope across the Formica table. He looked tired. His eyes were red-rimmed, but his hands were steady. "You are not going to like this, Charles," he said, signaling the waitress for a refill. "Your boy isn't just underwater. He is at the bottom of the Marianas Trench." I opened the envelope. The first document was a credit report, a sea of red ink. But it was the second document, a printed screenshot from a dark web forum, that made my blood run cold. "Julian has been playing investor," Miller explained, blowing on his coffee. "He got into cryptocurrency about 2 years ago, leveraged everything he had. He started with his own money, then he borrowed from banks, and when the banks cut him off, he went to the sharks." "How much?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "The bank's about 400,000. But the private lenders," Miller lowered his voice. "He owes $3 million to a syndicate operating out of the Port of Chicago. These are not bankers, Charles. They are the kind of people who break kneecaps as a warning and do much worse for a foreclosure." $3 million. I stared at the number. It was a staggering sum. It explained everything. The sweat on his upper lip, the shaking hands, the desperation in his eyes when he looked at my apartment. He wasn't trying to upgrade his lifestyle. He was trying to buy his life. "He has a deadline," Miller continued. "From what my sources tell me, the interest payments alone are $20,000 a month. He missed the last 2. They gave him until the end of the month to come up with a lump sum, or they start taking pieces of him." "The end of the month," I repeated. "That is in 6 days. He is desperate, Charles. He has mortgaged his own condo 3 times over. It is in foreclosure. The bank just hasn't evicted him yet because the paperwork is backed up. He is technically homeless and broke." Miller leaned forward. "If he thinks you are an easy target, he is not going to wait. He can't afford to wait." I paid Miller in cash and drove home. The city looked different now. The steel and glass towers didn't look like monuments to human achievement. They looked like assets to be liquidated. I was no longer a father figure to Julian. I was a piggy bank that he needed to smash open before his creditors smashed him. When I entered the penthouse, I felt the heavy, silent presence of the tablet in the living room. It was sitting on the coffee table where I had left it. I took off my coat and approached the device. It was time to give Julian the performance he was paying for. I sat down on the sofa, picking up the tablet. I tapped the screen, waking it up. I knew Marcus had set up the virtual layer so that the camera would see only a blurred, dark image, as if I were holding it at a bad angle, but the audio was crystal clear. I cleared my throat and dialed the number for the local pharmacy on the tablet's keypad. I put it on speakerphone. "Thank you for calling CVS Pharmacy," the automated voice chirped. "Hello," I said, my voice wavering with a practiced tremor. "Hello, is this Dr. Evans?" "Please listen closely to the following menu options," the machine replied. I don't know if I took my blue pills," I said, talking over the robot, sounding distressed. "I look at the bottle and I can't remember. Did I take them yesterday or is today Tuesday?" I paused, letting the silence hang. "I feel so confused lately," I whispered, leaning close to the microphone. "Everything is foggy. I can't find my checkbook. I don't know what is happening to me." I hung up the call. It was a crude performance, but to a desperate man hearing what he wanted to hear, it would be Shakespeare. The response was almost immediate. Less than 2 hours later, my landline rang. I let it ring 3 times before picking it up. "Hello," I answered, keeping my voice dull. "Dad, it is Julian." His voice was high-tight with adrenaline. "I was just thinking about you. How are you feeling?" "Oh, Julian," I sighed. "I don't know. I am having a bad day. I tried to call the doctor, but the phone was complicated. I feel like I am losing my grip on things." "That sounds scary, Dad," he said, and I could hear the eagerness bleeding through the faux sympathy. "You shouldn't have to worry about these things alone. You know I've been thinking. Maybe it is time I helped you out a bit more. With the administrative stuff." "Administrative?" "Yeah, like bills, insurance, the bank. Just so you don't have to stress about it. We could set up a power of attorney. It is just a piece of paper, Dad. It just means I can sign checks for you if you are having a bad day." The trap was set. He had taken the bait so fast he hadn't even checked for a hook. "I don't know, Julian," I said, hesitating. "I have always handled my own affairs." "I know, but look at what is happening," he pressed. "You said yourself you were confused. What if you forget to pay the property tax? What if you lose the insurance policy? I just want to protect you." "Protect me," I echoed. The irony was acidic on my tongue. "Let me think about it, son. I am just so tired right now." "Okay, Dad. You rest. I will come by tomorrow. We can talk about it then." "Tomorrow," I agreed. "Okay," I hung up. My hand was shaking not from age, but from rage. He was going to use my confusion to strip me bare. I needed to know the full extent of the demolition plan. I went to the master bedroom and walked into the walk-in closet. Behind a row of winter coats, there was a wall safe bolted into the concrete studs. I spun the dial right to 24 left, to 10 right to 68. The heavy steel door swung open. This was the one place the tablet could not see. I kept my most sensitive documents here: the deed to the penthouse, my life insurance policy, Margaret's wedding ring, and a stack of old files. I pulled out the file labeled Julian. It contained his birth certificate, his report cards from high school, and legal documents from when I formally became his guardian. I leafed through the papers, looking for anything that might give me leverage, and then I found it. It wasn't an official document. It was a piece of yellow legal pad paper, folded in quarters, tucked into the back of the folder. Julian must have left it here during his last visit 6 months ago, when I had asked him to retrieve a passport for me. He must have been doing some calculations and forgot to take his scratch pad. I unfolded the yellow paper. It was a list. Penthouse. List at $1.8 million. Quick sale $1.5 million. Lake Geneva Cottage. $850,000. Teacher's pension fund. Cash out value mom's jewelry. Auction estimate $60,000. Life insurance $750,000. Beneficiary change needed. Next to the total sum, he had written a date, November 1st. I stared at the handwriting. It was rushed, jagged. This wasn't a plan to manage my finances. This was a liquidation inventory. He had appraised my life down to the last brick. The Lake Geneva Cottage was a small cabin Margaret and I had bought for our 10th anniversary. It was where we had spent our summers. To Julian, it was just $850,000 towards his debt. And the date, November 1st. That was the deadline Miller had mentioned. Julian didn't just want power of attorney to pay my electric bill. He needed full control within the week so he could sell my home out from under me to pay off the loan sharks. I realized then that if I signed those papers, I wouldn't just be poor. I would be institutionalized. To sell the house quickly, he would need me out of the way. A cheap nursing home, a state-run facility for the mentally incompetent, that was his plan for me. He would warehouse me until I died, so he could keep living his lie. I put the paper back in the safe and locked the door. The finality of the metal click echoed in the closet. I needed air. I grabbed my keys and left the apartment, leaving the tablet behind on the table, recording the silence. I drove west out of the city to the Queen of Heaven Cemetery. The autumn wind was biting, stripping the last of the red leaves from the maples. I walked to the plot where Margaret lay. The granite stone was cold and polished. Margaret Smith, beloved wife and mother. I stood there for a long time looking at her name. I remembered the promise. Don't let him sink. I tried Maggie. I spoke to the stone, my voice cracking in the wind. I tried to hold him up. But he is not just sinking. He is trying to pull the whole house down with him. I touched the top of the headstone. He owes bad men a lot of money, and he has decided that I am the currency he is going to use to pay them. I can't let him do it, Maggie. I can't let him take everything we built. I felt a tear freeze on my cheek. I have to stop him, and to stop him I have to break him. I am sorry. I know he is your son, but I have to survive. I stood there until my hands were numb. Then I turned back to the car. The grief was still there, but the guilt was gone. It had been replaced by resolve. I drove back to the city as the sun went down. When I entered the apartment, I went straight to the bathroom. I turned on the bright vanity lights and looked at myself in the mirror. I saw a man of 68, strong, sharp-eyed, angry. "That man cannot exist anymore," I whispered. I relaxed my facial muscles. I let my jaw go slack. I allowed my eyelids to droop, dulling the intelligence in my gaze. I hunched my shoulders forward, shrinking my stature by 2 inches. I practiced a vacant stare, looking slightly past the reflection, rather than at it. I brought my hand up to my face and made it tremble. "Julian." I practiced saying my voice raspy and uncertain. "Is that you? I don't remember where I put the papers." It was a mask constructed from the prejudices of the young against the old. Julian expected a crumbling ruin, so I would give him one. "The show begins," I thought, though the words in my head were in English. "The show begins." I walked out into the living room, shuffled my feet, and picked up the tablet with a trembling hand. "Julian," I muttered to the device, knowing he was listening. "I need help. Please, come help me." I was ready for the foundation audit to end. It was time to start the demolition. In structural engineering, we often talk about the difference between a static load and a dynamic load. A static load is constant, like the weight of the roof. A dynamic load is changing, moving, vibrating. It is the wind gusting at 60 miles an hour, or the rhythmic marching of 1,000 soldiers across a suspension bridge. Dynamic loads are infinitely more dangerous because they create resonance. If the frequency of the load matches the natural frequency of the structure, the vibrations amplify until the steel snaps. Julian was no longer a static weight on my life. He had become a dynamic force, hammering away at my sanity, trying to find the frequency that would shatter me. I began the next phase of my counter-operation on Tuesday morning. I sat at my kitchen island with a cup of cold tea and the compromise tablet. I knew the camera was watching, obscured by the smudge filter Marcus had applied, but the screen recording software was capturing every pixel in high definition. I opened the browser. My fingers hovered over the glass, trembling slightly, a deliberate affectation. I typed slowly, hunting and pecking for the letters. SYMPTOMS of early Alzheimer's. I let the search results load. I clicked on the first article and scrolled through it at a snail's pace, pausing on sections about memory loss and confusion. I read them aloud, whispering to myself as if I were trying to process the terrifying information. "Forgetting names," I muttered to the microphone. "Difficulty with familiar tasks. Misplacing items." I sighed, a long, rattling exhalation of fear. Then, I hit the back button and typed a new query. Best nursing homes, Chicago. Cost of assisted living. How to sell home quickly for cash. I was painting a portrait of a man who was terrified of his own mind and looking for an exit strategy. I was validating every hope Julian had. I was telling him that his plan was working, that the foundation was cracking exactly where he had placed the explosives. Julian's visits became daily. He was like a vulture, circling a dying animal, coming closer with every pass. But he wasn't just observing anymore. He was actively sabotaging my environment. On Wednesday, he arrived with takeout for lunch. While I was in the kitchen getting plates, I heard him moving in the living room. It was subtle, the soft scrape of a chair leg, the clink of ceramic. When I returned, the television remote was not on the side table where I always kept it. It was on the bookshelf behind a framed photo. My reading glasses, which I had left on the arm of the sofa, were now on the dining table. "Dad, here, let me help you," Julian said, taking the plates from my hands. He looked at me with a pity that made my skin crawl. "You left your glasses over there. You must have been looking for them." I thought I had them right here," I said, touching my face, looking bewildered. "You are forgetting things again, Dad," he said softly. "It is okay. It happens." This is a technique known as gaslighting. It is psychological warfare designed to make the victim question their own reality. If I were truly vulnerable, if I did not have the steel mind of an engineer who remembers the exact load capacity of a beam installed 30 years ago, I might have believed him. I might have thought I was losing my mind. But I knew exactly where I had put my glasses. I knew exactly where the remote belonged. Julian was moving my world by inches to make me believe I was falling off the edge. I decided to escalate the scenario. I needed to show him a catastrophic failure. "My keys," I said, suddenly, standing up and patting my pockets. "Julian, I have an appointment at the cardiologist. Where are my car keys?" I had taped the keys to the underside of the dining chair I was sitting on. They were inches from my hand, but to him, they were gone. "I don't know, Dad," he said, chewing his pasta. "Did you check the bowl by the door?" "They are not there," I shouted, injecting a note of panic into my voice. I began to tear the room apart. I threw cushions off the sofa. I opened drawers and slammed them shut. "I need to drive. I can't miss this appointment." Julian stood up and caught my arms. Dad, stop. Calm down." "I can't find them," I wailed, letting my body sag against him. "I can't find anything anymore. My head. It is all mixed up." He held me, and I felt his heartbeat against my chest. It was steady. He wasn't panicked. He was relieved. He was watching the demolition go exactly as planned. "You shouldn't be driving anyway, Dad," he said soothingly, like one speaks to a child. "Not when you are like this. It is dangerous. You could hurt someone. You could hurt yourself." He guided me back to the chair. "Maybe this is a sign," he said, kneeling beside me so he was looking up into my face. "You have so much on your plate. The house, the bills, the doctors. It is too much for one person to manage, especially when things are getting fuzzy." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a blue folder. "I talked to a lawyer friend of mine," he said. "Just for advice. He said the responsible thing to do, the loving thing to do, is to set up a power of attorney. It doesn't mean you lose your rights, Dad. It just means I can step in and handle the heavy lifting. I can sign the checks. I can talk to the insurance company. I can keep you safe." I looked at the document. General power of attorney. It was broad sweeping. It granted him the authority to sell real estate, liquidate assets, and make medical decisions. It was not a safety net. It was a surrender of sovereignty. "I don't know," I whimpered, pushing the paper away slightly. "It seems so final." "It is not final," he insisted, pushing it back. "It is a tool, just like your calculator. Let me be your calculator, Dad. Let me solve the problems for you." I looked at him, tears welling in my eyes, tears of rage that I transmuted into fear. "I need to think about it," I said. "Just give me a day or two. My head hurts. I can't read legal words when my head hurts." Julian's jaw tightened. I saw the flash of impatience, the metal fatigue in his mask. He had a deadline. The loan sharks were waiting. He needed that signature today. "Okay," he said, forcing a smile that looked like a rictus of pain. "Take a day, but Dad, don't wait too long. We need to get you organized before it gets worse." He left an hour later, leaving the document on the table like a loaded weapon. As soon as he was gone, I went to the bedroom and retrieved my burner phone, a cheap, prepaid device I had bought with cash and kept hidden in a hollowed-out book on structural dynamics. I went to the balcony, sliding the glass door shut behind me, leaving the tablet inside. I called Marcus. "He made the move," I said. "He presented the power of attorney." "We are ahead of him," Marcus replied. His voice was tight. "Charles, I tapped into the email traffic of that lawyer he brought over last time. The guy named Vance. And it is worse than we thought. They aren't waiting for you to sign the power of attorney to start the process. Vance has already drafted the quitclaim deed for your penthouse. They have the transfer documents for your investment accounts ready to go. They are dated for this Friday." "Friday," I said. "That is in 2 days. They are confident," Marcus said. "Or they are terrified of the people Julian owes money to. Probably both. But Charles, there is something else. In the chat logs between Julian and Vance, Julian mentioned that you were agitated and might need calming down to facilitate the signing." "Calming down. Be careful," Marcus warned. "If he offers you anything to eat or drink, don't take it." I hung up and looked out at the city. The wind was picking up, rattling the balcony railing. The next day, Thursday, Julian arrived in the late afternoon. He looked haggard. Dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes. The stress of his debt was eating him alive, and that made him volatile. "I brought you something," he said, pulling a small plastic bottle from his pocket. "I stopped by the health food store. The clerk said these are great for memory and focus. Ginkgo biloba and some other natural herbs. I thought they might help with the fog." He walked to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. He shook 2 pills out of the bottle. They were small, oval, and pale blue. "Here," he said, holding them out to me. "Take them. It will help you think clearly, so we can look at those papers again." I looked at the pills in his palm. I looked at the glass of water. This was the crossing of the Rubicon. Stealing my money was one thing. Gaslighting me was another. But this was a chemical assault. He was trying to medicate me into submission. "Thank you, Julian," I said. "You are such a good boy." I took the pills. I put them in my mouth. "Drink," he said, handing me the water. I raised the glass and took a large swallow. As I did, I used my tongue to slide the pills into the pocket of my cheek, a trick I had seen in movies, but never thought I would have to perform. I swallowed the water loudly. "Ah," I said, wiping my mouth. "I hope they work." "They will," Julian said. He was watching me closely, his eyes tracking the movement of my throat. "They act fast. Why don't you sit in the recliner, relax for a bit? I will make some tea." "That sounds nice," I said. I shuffled to the recliner. As soon as Julian turned his back to fill the kettle, I coughed into my hand, spitting the pills into my palm. I slid my hand into the pocket of my cardigan and dropped them inside. I sat there for 20 minutes, letting my eyelids droop, letting my head loll to the side. "Dad," Julian asked softly, standing over me. I mumbled, slurring my words. "So tired. Just need a nap." "Sleep," he whispered. "I will be right here." He went back to the kitchen. I heard the rustle of papers. He was probably organizing the documents, getting ready to put a pen in my limp hand the moment I woke up refreshed. I waited until I heard him go into the bathroom. The moment the door clicked shut, I moved. I didn't shuffle. I moved with the silent speed of a cat. I went to the bedroom, grabbed my burner phone, and took the pills out of my pocket. I took a clear photo of the pills. Then, I used an image search app I had installed. The results came back in seconds. Identification, alprazolam, 1 milligram. Brand name, Xanax. Side effects in elderly patients. Extreme drowsiness, confusion, memory, impairment. Loss of coordination, paradoxical aggression. 1 milligram was a high dose for someone who had never taken it. 2 milligrams, the dose he had just given me, would have knocked me out cold for hours, and when I woke up, I would have been in a complete cognitive fog. I would have signed anything just to make the room stop spinning. He wasn't giving me vitamins. He was chemically restraining me. He was risking my heart, my respiratory system, my life, just to get a signature. I stared at the blue oval on the screen. "This isn't greed," I whispered to the empty room. "This is evil." I felt a coldness spread through my veins that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. It was the absolute zero of emotional detachment. Julian was dead to me. The boy I raised was gone. What remained was a dangerous structural flaw that needed to be removed before it brought the whole building down. I heard the toilet flush. I sprinted back to the recliner and slumped down, my mouth slightly open, my breathing shallow. Julian walked back into the room. He stood over me for a long moment. Then he reached down and patted my cheek. "Almost there, old man," he muttered. "Almost there." He went to the window and pulled out his phone to make a call. I waited until he was distracted. Then I carefully reached into my pocket and pressed the speed dial button on my burner phone. I didn't bring it to my ear. I just let it dial, knowing Marcus was on the other end. I whispered into the fabric of my cardigan, loud enough for the phone to catch, but soft enough that Julian wouldn't hear. "It is time," I said. "He drugged me, or tried to. Call Rodriguez. But tell him I want to catch them in the act. I want the lawyer, the papers, everything." I paused, listening to Julian's muffled voice by the window. "Bring the police," I whispered. "But make sure they are quiet. I want him to think he has won until the moment the handcuffs click." I ended the call and let my head drop back against the leather. I closed my eyes. The load was at its peak. The structure was groaning. But tomorrow the controlled demolition would begin, and I would be the one pushing the plunger. The meeting place was the underground parking structure of the Millennium Park Garage's Level 3, Section D. It was a cavern of poured concrete and fluorescent hum, a massive subterranean foundation that held up the city's most famous green space. To most people, it was just a place to park cars. To me, it was a marvel of load distribution, capable of supporting tons of soil steel and thousands of tourists walking overhead. It was the perfect place to discuss the weight that was about to crush my stepson. I arrived at 10 in the morning on Friday. I had left the tablet at home plugged into the kitchen outlet, its camera staring blindly at a loop of pre-recorded footage. Marcus had set up a video of me sleeping in the recliner chest, rising and falling in a rhythmic, hypnotic cycle. As far as Julian knew, I was comatose in my living room. Marcus was already there, leaning against the hood of a nondescript sedan. Beside him stood a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite. Detective Rodriguez was shorter than I expected, but he possessed a density of presence that filled the empty space around him. He wore a cheap suit and a weary expression, the uniform of a man who spent his days wading through the sewage of human nature. "Mr. Smith," Rodriguez said, extending a hand. His grip was dry and firm. "Marcus has been telling me a hell of a story. I hope for your sake he is exaggerating." "He is not," I said, opening my coat. I reached into the inside pocket and pulled out a small plastic evidence bag I had purchased at a hobby store years ago. Inside were the 2 blue pills I had salvaged from my mouth. Alprazolam, 2 milligrams. He tried to administer them to me yesterday under the guise of herbal supplements. Rodriguez took the bag, holding it up to the dim garage light. His eyes narrowed. "Attempted poisoning," he muttered. "That kicks this up from fraud to assault. Maybe worse." That is just the tip of the iceberg, Detective, Marcus said. He opened his laptop, which was resting on the hood of the car. Show him the dashboard. Marcus keyed in a command. The screen filled with the interface of the Ghost View spyware. He showed Rodriguez the logs, the keystroke capture, the GPS, tracking history, the audio files recorded without my consent. This is what is running on Mr. Smith's tablet right now, Marcus explained, his voice echoing slightly in the concrete chamber. It is military-grade surveillance software. The user on the other end has administrative access to Charles's banking apps, his email, and his microphone. We traced the command signal to an iPhone registered to a Julian Davis, currently located at an address in River North. Rodriguez leaned in, watching the data scroll. He let out a low whistle. I have seen tracking apps in domestic violence cases, Rodriguez said. But this is sophisticated. This is organized. He owes $3 million to loan sharks, I said. He is desperate. He has a deadline of November 1st. He intends to have me sign a power of attorney and a quitclaim deed to my penthouse before the weekend is over, so he can liquidate my assets. Rodriguez straightened up, looking from the laptop to me. The skepticism had vanished from his face, replaced by the sharp hunting look of a predator catching a scent. If we arrest him now, Rodriguez said, thinking aloud, we get him for the spyware and the drugs. Possession of a controlled substance, illegal surveillance. He gets a good lawyer, pleads it down to a misdemeanor, says he was just concerned for his dad's safety. He walks in 2 years, maybe less. That is not enough, I said. I want him buried. Rodriguez nodded slowly. I agree. To make the big charges stick, grand larceny, conspiracy, elder abuse with intent to defraud, we need him to cross the finish line. We need him to present the fraudulent documents and attempt to get you to sign them while he thinks he has you incapacitated. A sting, I said. Exactly, Rodriguez said. We need to catch him in the act of taking the property. We need the lawyer there too. If this Vance guy is notarizing papers he knows are signed under duress or by a drugged man, he is going down too. We can disbar him and throw him in the cell next to your stepson. What do I need to do? I asked. You need to be the bait, Rodriguez said, looking me in the eye. We are going to wire you up. We are going to put cameras and mics in your apartment. You have to invite them over. You have to play the part of the confused compliant victim, right up until the pen touches the paper. It is dangerous, Charles. If he realizes you are wearing a wire. He thinks I am a senile old man who can't find his car keys, I said, my voice cold. He won't look for a wire because he doesn't respect me enough to think I am capable of wearing one. Rodriguez cracked a small, grim smile. All right, we move fast. My team can be at your place in 2 hours. We will go in through the service elevator disguised as HVAC repairmen. Marcus, can you loop that video feed on the tablet so Julian doesn't see us installing the equipment? I can give you a 4-hour window, Marcus said. I will tell the spyware the camera sensor is overheating and shut it down temporarily. It will look like a hardware glitch. Do it, Rodriguez ordered. The installation was a masterpiece of efficiency. Rodriguez's team moved through my penthouse with the precision of a special forces unit. They replaced the smoke detector in the living room with one containing a high-definition wide-angle lens. They placed audio transmitters behind the baseboards and inside the hollow leg of the dining table. Then came my turn. A female officer taped a thin wire to my chest, hiding the transmitter pack in the small of my back, taped flat against my spine, so it wouldn't show under my sweater. It has a 6-hour battery life, she told me. Once you activate it, it stays on. Don't hug anyone. I don't plan to, I said. By 4 in the afternoon, the police were gone. The apartment looked exactly as it had before, but the air felt charged electric. A van from the city water department was parked down the street, where Rodriguez and his team were monitoring the feeds. I sat in the recliner, the wire itching against my skin, and waited. At 5:15, the phone rang. I picked up the landline. "Hello, Dad." Julian's voice was brisk, energized. "Good news. I talked to Mr. Vance. He managed to clear his schedule for tomorrow morning. Saturday. We can come by at 10 o'clock and get all that paperwork sorted out." "Tomorrow?" I asked, injecting a note of anxiety into my voice. "On a Saturday? Is it that urgent?" "The markets are volatile, Dad," Julian lied smoothly. "I was looking at your portfolio. If we don't move some of those assets into a protected trust by Monday morning, you could lose." "Well, a substantial amount. Maybe 20%. It was a clumsy lie. Markets are closed on weekends. But he was banking on my ignorance. 20%, I repeated, sounding horrified. That is a lot of money." "It is," he said. "That is why we need to sign the power of attorney, so I can stop the bleeding. I just want to end this worry for you, Dad. You sound so tired lately." "I am tired, Julian," I said, and for a moment I wasn't acting. "I am very tired. I know. Listen, once we sign this, everything changes. You won't have to deal with the bills or the maintenance of that big apartment anymore." He paused, and then he said the words that sealed his fate. "We can find you a nice place, a smaller place, somewhere with staff who can watch you 24 hours a day. You will be able to rest in the best place for someone in your condition." The best place. I knew what that meant. He wasn't looking at luxury retirement communities. Miller, the private investigator, had found search queries on Julian's laptop for state-subsidized facilities in rural Illinois places, with one-star ratings and reports of patient neglect. He wanted to warehouse me in a place that cost nothing, so he could keep the entirety of my pension. "That sounds safe," I whispered. "I just want to be safe." "You will be," he promised. "I will see you at 10, Dad. Make sure you get a good night's sleep. Take those vitamins I gave you." "I will," I said. "Goodbye, Julian." I hung up the phone. "Did you get that?" I asked the empty room, knowing Rodriguez was listening in the van. Loud and clear, Rodriguez's voice came through a tiny earpiece I had inserted into my left ear. "We have him on record lying about market conditions and implying medical necessity for the transfer. That is coercion. We are good for tomorrow." I removed the earpiece and hid it in my pocket. I would put it back in tomorrow morning. The sun went down over Chicago. The city lights came on a grid of electricity and ambition. I stood by the window, looking at the structures I had spent my life studying. I went to my study and pulled out a tube of old blueprints. They were the schematics for the River Point Tower, a project I had consulted on 15 years ago. I unrolled the vellum on my desk, weighing the corners down with books. I traced the white lines with my finger. I looked at the load path the way the weight of 50 stories was transferred down through the steel columns, into the concrete caissons, and deep into the bedrock. In engineering, there is a principle called redundancy. You never rely on a single beam to hold up a critical section. You build backup systems. You create alternative paths for the stress to travel if one component fails. Julian was a single point of failure. He had no redundancy. He had built his life on debt and lies a structure with no core. He was putting all his pressure on me, assuming I would crumble, and he would stand on the rubble. He didn't understand that I was not the foundation he thought I was. I was the demolition charge. I looked at the detailed drawing of a shear wall, a reinforced concrete wall designed to resist lateral forces like wind or earthquakes. It works by taking the punishment and dispersing it into the ground, grounding the energy so the building doesn't sway. "A building stands because it knows how to handle pressure," I murmured to the silent room. "It doesn't fight the wind. It channels it." I rolled up the blueprints. I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. The fear was gone. The anger was gone. All that remained was the physics of the situation: action and reaction, force and resistance. Julian was bringing a load of $3 million of debt and a lifetime of resentment into this apartment tomorrow. He expected to transfer that load onto my shoulders. He was wrong. I turned off the desk lamp. Darkness filled the room, save for the blinking red light of the smoke detector, the eye of the law watching over me. A well-designed structure disperses pressure, I said, reciting the first rule I taught my students. It takes the weight and sends it where it belongs. I looked toward the door, where my stepson would enter in less than 12 hours. "Tomorrow," I whispered. "The pressure crushes Julian." In structural mechanics, shear stress is defined as a force that causes layers of a material to slide past one another in opposite directions. It is the most insidious kind of pressure because it does not compress. It tears. It is the wind pushing the top of a skyscraper east, while the foundation holds it west. If the material is ductile, it deforms. If it is brittle, it snaps. On the morning of the 11th day, the atmosphere inside my penthouse was brittle. Chicago had woken up to a slate-gray sky, the kind of low, oppressive cloud cover that turns the city into a monochrome photograph. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 42nd floor, distorting the view of the skyline into a weeping blur. Inside, the air was still and heavy, charged with the static electricity of imminent violence. I sat at the head of my mahogany dining table. I was wearing an old, moth-eaten beige cardigan that I usually reserved for painting or dirty work. It hung loosely on my frame, making my shoulders look slumped and narrow. I had deliberately skipped shaving for 2 days, leaving a rough white stubble on my chin that aged me by a decade. Beneath the wool, taped securely to my sternum, was the wire. It was warm against my skin, a constant reminder that I was not alone. "We have audio." Detective Rodriguez's voice crackled in my earpiece, tiny and tinny. "Visual is clear through the smoke detector. Sit tight, Charles. We are right outside." The doorbell rang at exactly 10 in the morning. I shuffled to the door, dragging my feet on the hardwood, practicing the shallow, confused breathing I had perfected over the last 48 hours. When I opened the door, Julian was standing there. He looked like a man holding his breath underwater. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, and he smelled faintly of sour sweat, masked by too much cologne. Beside him stood a man I did not know, but I recognized the type immediately. He was short and thick-set, wearing a pinstripe suit that cost a lot of money but fit him poorly. He had slicked back hair and a smile that looked like it had been practiced in a mirror. "Dad," Julian said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "This is Mr. Vance, the lawyer I told you about." "Mr. Smith," Vance said, extending a hand that felt damp and fleshy. "A pleasure. Julian has told me so much about you. A retired engineer, yes, impressive." Yes, I stammered, shaking his hand weakly and letting it drop. Come in. Come in out of the rain." They walked into the living room. Vance's eyes immediately swept the space, appraising the furniture, the art, the view. It was the same hungry look. Julian had the look of a butcher estimating the weight of a carcass. "We don't have much time, Dad," Julian said, checking his watch. "Mr. Vance has a flight to catch. We need to get this done." "A flight?" I asked, blinking rapidly. I thought we were just talking." "We are talking," Vance said smoothly, opening his leather briefcase on my dining table. He pulled out a stack of documents that was at least 2 inches thick. "But we are also acting. Julian tells me you are concerned about the volatility of your portfolio. Very wise. The market is taking a beating this week. We need to shield your assets immediately." They sat down. Julian pulled out a chair for me, guiding me into it with a firm hand on my shoulder. It wasn't a comforting touch. It was a restraint. "What is all this?" I asked, looking at the mountain of paper. "It is the insurance paperwork," Julian lied. "And the trust fund setup. Remember we talked about this. It is just to make sure the government doesn't take your money if you get sick. I looked at the top document. It was a durable power of attorney form. Beneath it, barely visible, was the corner of a quitclaim deed. It looks complicated, I whispered. That is why I am here, Vance said, uncapping a heavy fountain pen. I have drafted everything according to standard protocols. All you need to do is sign where I point. I will handle the filing. Vance slid the first page toward me. He didn't let go of the paper. He held the top corner, controlling the pace. Sign here, he said, pointing to a line at the bottom. This authorizes Julian to communicate with your banks. I picked up the pen. My hand trembled violently. It wasn't entirely an act. The adrenaline pumping through my veins was making my extremities shake. I brought the nib to the paper, then hesitated. But, I said, my voice quavering, does this mean I can't go to the bank anymore? I like talking to the teller. Her name is Brenda. Vance sighed, a short, sharp expulsion of air through his nose. You can still go to the bank, Mr. Smith, Vance said, his tone dripping with condescension. This just helps Julian help you. Please sign. I scribbled a shaky signature that looked nothing like my real one. Vance flipped the page instantly. Here, he said. And here. He was moving fast, flipping through the boilerplate text, trying to get to the meat of the theft, without letting me read the ingredients. Wait, I said, squinting at the fine print. What does this say? Liquidation of... I can't read it without my glasses. It says, liquidation of liabilities, Vance lied. It is about paying off your credit cards, Dad. You don't have any, remember it is standard. Julian cut in, his voice tight. Just sign it, I signed. Page after page. The sound of the paper turning was loud in the quiet room. Swish, scratch, swish, scratch. I was delaying. I needed them to get to the deed. I needed the specific intent to sell the house to be recorded on the wire. My hand hurts, I complained, dropping the pen. It clattered onto the glass tabletop and rolled onto the floor. Julian closed his eyes. I saw the muscles in his jaw bunching. The sheer stress was building. He was vibrating with the need to be done, to get his $3 million to save his own skin. I will get it, Vance said, annoyed, bending down to retrieve the pen. I need water, I said. My mouth is dry. Julian, can I have some water? Dad, we are almost done, Julian said through gritted teeth. I can't sign if I am thirsty, I whined. I feel dizzy. Julian stood up so abruptly, his chair screeched against the floor. He marched to the kitchen. I heard the tap running aggressively. He came back and slammed the glass down in front of me. Water sloshed onto the documents. Drink, he ordered. I took a small sip, holding the glass with both hands, letting it rattle against my teeth. Okay, I said. Okay. Vance wiped the water off the papers with his sleeve. He flipped to the back of the stack. This is the last one, Vance said. The big one. This transfers the title of the property into the trust. He placed the quitclaim deed in front of me. It was bold and undeniable. Property address 300 North State Street, Unit 4201. Grantor Charles Smith. Grantee, the Smith Family Trust. I knew, and Rodriguez knew, that the Smith Family Trust was a shell entity controlled solely by Julian. This is for the house, I said, my voice suddenly clearer, less tremulous. I looked up at Julian. This is for the apartment. It is just a title change, Dad, Julian said, leaning over me, his shadow falling across the paper. It stays in the family. It just protects it. Protects it from who, I asked? From taxes. From the state. Just sign it. But, I paused, looking down at the paper. I let the silence stretch. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Julian, I said softly, in this paperwork, is there a clause about selling the house? Because your mother loved this place. She loved the view of the river. She made me promise we would never leave. I saw Julian flinch. The mention of his mother was a spark in a room full of gasoline. "Dad, please," he said. "I need to know," I pressed, looking him in the eye. "Are you going to sell it? Because if you sell it, I won't have anywhere to go." Brenda at the bank said. "Forget Brenda," Julian snapped. His voice cracked like a whip. "Just sign the goddamn paper, Charles." Vance looked up, alarmed by the outburst. "Julian, calm down." "I can't calm down," Julian yelled, pacing away from the table, and then turning back. The mask was gone. The caring son had evaporated, leaving only the desperate debtor. "We have been here for 20 minutes. He is stalling. He is just an old man wasting our time." He slammed his hands down on the table, leaning into my face. I could smell the coffee and fear on his breath. "Mom is dead, Dad," Julian hissed. The words were cold, cruel, designed to hurt. "Mom is dead. She has been dead for 3 years. She doesn't care about the view. She doesn't care about the house." "But I care," I whispered. "Well, you can't afford to care," Julian shouted. "This place is too big for you. It is a waste. You are one old man in a 3-bedroom penthouse. Do you know what this is worth? Do you have any idea?" $2 million, I said quietly. "Yes, $2 million. Julian admitted, his eyes wide and manic. $2 million that is just sitting here gathering dust while you shuffle around in your slippers. It is selfish, Dad. It is selfish of you to keep it." "So you are going to sell it?" I asked. "You are going to sell my home." "Yes," Julian screamed. "Yes, I am going to sell it. I am going to sell it, and I am going to put you in a home where you can be looked after, and I am going to use the money to fix things, to fix everything." "To pay your debts," I said. Julian froze. For a split second, the air left the room. He looked at me, really looked at me. He saw the old sweater, the stubble, the shaking hands. But maybe he saw a glimmer of the engineer behind the eyes. "To fix the family," he corrected, lowering his voice, realizing he had shouted. "To help us. Just sign the paper. Please. If you love me, you will sign it." I looked at Vance. The lawyer was staring at his briefcase, looking uncomfortable. He knew this was coercion. He knew this was illegal. But he didn't stop it. He just tapped his finger on the deed. "Mr. Smith," Vance said quietly, "if you sign, we can all go home." I looked down at the paper. The line for my signature was waiting. "You are right, Julian," I said. My voice was no longer shaking. It was low, resonant, the voice of a man who had commanded construction crews on skyscrapers. I picked up the pen. I held it firmly. My hand was steady as a rock. "Things should be where they belong," I said. "The load must be transferred to the foundation." "Exactly," Julian breathed relief, washing over his face. "Exactly, Dad." I brought the pen to the paper. I could feel the vibration of the wire on my chest. I could imagine Rodriguez in the van, his hand hovering over the go command. "I will sign," I said. "Let's put everything in its proper place." I touched the pen to the paper. Julian leaned in, his eyes, hungry, watching the ink flow. He thought he was watching his salvation. He didn't know he was watching the final bolt being removed from the scaffolding of his life. I signed, but I didn't sign my name. I wrote in clear block letters, "I do not consent." Then I looked up at my stepson. The ink was still wet on the page. The block letters I had written, "I do not consent," stood out in stark, defiant contrast to the dense legal jargon surrounding them. Julian stared at the paper. His brain, wired for greed and panic, could not immediately process the input. He blinked once, twice. He looked at the words as if they were written in a foreign language. "Dad," he said, his voice faltering. What is this? You made a mistake. You have to sign your name." "It is not a mistake," I said. The tremor in my voice was gone. The hesitation was gone. I sat back in my chair, removed my hand from the table, and straightened my spine. I inhaled deeply, filling my lungs with the cool, conditioned air of the penthouse, and let my shoulders settle. The transition was physical, immediate, and terrifyingly complete. I watched the realization ripple across Julian's face. He saw the confused old man evaporate, replaced by the man who had stared down union bosses and navigated structural crises on 100-story towers. "I don't understand," Julian stammered, looking from the paper to me. "Why did you write that we are running out of time?" I looked him dead in the eye. My gaze was steady, cold, and heavy. "Julian," I said, my voice dropping an octave to its natural commanding baritone. "Do you know what a factor of safety is in engineering?" The room went silent. Even the rain against the window seemed to hold its breath. Vance, the lawyer, stopped shuffling papers. He looked at me, and I saw the blood drain from his face. He recognized the tone. It was the tone of a man who held all the cards. "What?" Julian whispered. "What are you talking about?" "The factor of safety," I continued, speaking with deliberate precision. "It is a ratio. It is how much stronger a system is than it actually needs to be for an intended load. If you build a bridge to hold 10 tons, you design it to hold 30. Why? Because you always calculate for the worst-case scenario. You assume the materials are flawed. You assume the wind will blow harder than recorded history. You assume the load will be heavier than expected." I stood up. I didn't push myself up with groaning effort. I rose smoothly, towering over him as he sat frozen in his chair. "You assumed I was a crumbling structure, Julian," I said. "You calculated that my mind was weak, that my memory was failing, that I was a dead load waiting to be removed. You didn't account for the safety factor. You didn't account for the fact that I am still the engineer who built this life." Julian pushed his chair back, the legs scraping screechingly against the floor. "Dad, you are confusing me. You are having an episode." "Stop it!" I snapped. The command cracked through the room like a whip. "The act is over. I know about the $3 million you owe to the syndicate at the port. I know about your deadline on November 1st. Julian's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish hauled onto a deck, gasping for air. "I know that you mortgaged your own condo until it was hollow," I continued, stepping closer to the table. "I know that you paid $4,000 for a piece of software called Ghost View to turn my birthday present into a surveillance device. And I know that yesterday you dissolved 2 milligrams of alprazolam in a glass of water and tried to chemically lobotomize me because you were too impatient to wait for natural decline." "No," Julian whispered, shaking his head. "No, that is crazy. You are paranoid." I reached out and picked up the tablet from the side table, where it had been sitting dark and silent. Julian flinched as if I had picked up a weapon. In a way, I had. "You think this is your eye?" I asked, holding the black slab up. "You think you are the one watching?" I tapped the screen. Marcus had programmed a specific trigger. With one touch, the loop of me sleeping vanished. The screen flashed white, then resolved into a live video feed. But it wasn't a feed from the tablet's camera. It was a feed to the tablet. The screen showed the interior of a van. I could see monitors, audio equipment, and the back of a man's head wearing a headset. Then the man turned around. It was Detective Rodriguez. He looked into the camera, looked right at Julian, and smiled grimly. "Smile, Julian," I said, tossing the tablet onto the table, amidst the legal papers. It landed with a heavy thud. "You are streaming live to the Chicago Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a structure in freefall before it hits the ground. Julian looked at the screen. He saw the police van. He saw the timestamp counting up in real time. He looked at the wire taped to my chest, visible now, through the thin fabric of my sweater, as I stood tall. The collapse was instantaneous. "You!" Julian choked out. His face twisted. It wasn't fear anymore. It was pure, unadulterated hatred. The mask of the loving stepson didn't just crack, it shattered into dust. "You treacherous old bastard." "The pills," I said, ignoring his outburst. "The spyware, the coercion. It is all recorded, Julian. Every word, every keystroke, every lie. Panic is a volatile accelerant." Julian realized he was trapped. His eyes darted around the room, the window, the hallway, the kitchen. He looked at the stack of signed papers on the table, the evidence of his crime. "Give me those," he shrieked. He lunged. He didn't go for me. He went for the documents. He threw himself across the table, his hands clawing at the quitclaim deed, desperate to destroy the physical proof of his attempt to steal my home. "Vance, help me!" he screamed at the lawyer. But Vance was smarter than Julian. Vance was already backing away, his hands raised in the universal gesture of surrender, putting distance between himself and the disaster. Julian grabbed the papers, crumpling them in his fists, tearing at them with manic energy. "It doesn't matter," I shouted over his frenzy. "The intent is recorded." And then the world exploded. Crash. The front door of the penthouse didn't open. It disintegrated. The heavy oak frame splintered inward with a deafening boom as the battering ram hit it. Police. Chicago police. The roar was overwhelming. It filled the apartment, bouncing off the glass walls. Men in tactical gear flooded into the hallway, their boots thundering on the hardwood floors like a drum roll. "Get down, everybody down!" The peaceful, elegant living room turned into a chaos of shouting and motion. Vance dropped to his knees instantly, interlacing his fingers behind his head. He was weeping, a soft, pathetic sound, lost in the noise. "I didn't know I was just the notary. I didn't know." Julian froze. He was standing by the table, clutching the torn papers to his chest. He looked at the door filled with armed officers. He looked at me, standing calm and untouched in the center of the storm. Then he made the worst decision of his life. He ran. He spun around and bolted toward the kitchen. He knew the layout of the apartment better than anyone. He knew there was a service entrance off the pantry that led to the freight elevator. "Stop him," Rodriguez shouted, charging into the room. Julian scrambled over the kitchen island, knocking over a vase of flowers. Water and glass shattered across the floor. He slipped, scrambled up and sprinted for the pantry door. He reached for the handle, his face twisted in a rictus of desperate hope. The door swung open before he could touch it. But it wasn't empty space behind it. It was a wall of a man. Marcus stood in the doorway. He wasn't wearing tactical gear. He was wearing his black t-shirt and jeans, but he looked immovable. He had been waiting in the service corridor, the final redundancy in our safety system. Julian skidded to a halt, his eyes widening. "Going somewhere, Julian?" Marcus asked. His voice was calm, almost conversational. Julian tried to shove past him. "Move, get out of my way." Marcus didn't budge. He simply stepped forward, used Julian's own momentum against him, and shoved him back into the kitchen. Julian stumbled, his feet slipping on the wet floor where the vase had broken. He went down hard, crashing onto the tiles. Before he could scramble up, 2 SWAT officers were on him. "Hands, show us your hands." They hauled him up, spinning him around. I watched as they wrenched his arms behind his back. The sound of the handcuffs engaging click, click, click was sharp and final. It was the sound of a lock snapping shut, not on a door, but on a life. "You have the right to remain silent," an officer recited the words practiced and wrote. "Anything you say can and will be used against you." Julian wasn't silent. He was thrashing, spitting, kicking at the officers. "Let me go. You can't do this. I am the victim here. He is crazy. He tricked me." They dragged him out of the kitchen and into the living room. Vance was already being led out in cuffs, head bowed, sobbing. But Julian was fighting to the bitter end. As they pushed him past me, he dug his heels into the carpet. He stopped, panting, his hair wild, his expensive suit stained with water and flower stems. He looked at me. There was no remorse in his eyes. There was no realization of the moral magnitude of what he had done. There was only the fury of a narcissist who had been outplayed. "You set me up," he spat, spittle flying from his lips. "You senile old piece of garbage, you set me up." I looked at him. I looked at the boy I had raised. I looked for a trace of the 12-year-old who used to ask me for help with his math homework. I looked for the young man I had taught to drive. I found nothing. The stress test was complete. The material had failed. "I didn't set you up, Julian," I said softly. The room was quiet enough now that everyone, Rodriguez, Marcus, the officers, could hear me. "I just let you be yourself. You did the rest." "I hope you die alone in this big empty box," Julian screamed as they shoved him forward. "I hope you rot here. You are nothing. You have no one." "Get him out of here," Rodriguez ordered, his voice disgusted. The officers marched him to the shattered door. Julian continued to scream obscenities, his voice echoing down the hallway, until the elevator doors finally slid shut, cutting off the noise. The silence rushed back into the penthouse. It was a ringing, heavy silence. The floor was covered in broken glass. The table was scattered with torn legal documents. The front door hung off its hinges. My home looked like a disaster zone. Marcus walked over from the kitchen. He stood beside me, looking at the empty doorway, where Julian had vanished. "Are you okay, Charles?" he asked quietly. I looked around the room. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't joy. It was the feeling I used to get after a controlled demolition when the dust clears, and you see that the dangerous structure is gone, leaving a clean, empty space, ready for something new. "I am fine, Marcus," I said. I reached up and ripped the wire off my chest, wincing, as the tape pulled at my skin. I tossed the transmitter onto the table next to the tablet. "He called me a dead load," I said, looking at the debris on the floor. "He was wrong." Rodriguez walked over, holstering his weapon. He looked tired, but satisfied. "We got everything, Mr. Smith," he said. "The confession, the documents, the drugs, the spyware. He is not coming back. Not for 20 years, if I have my say." "Thank you, Detective," I said. I walked to the window and looked out at the rain. The storm was breaking. Faint gray light was filtering through the clouds. I didn't feel like a father who had lost a son. I felt like an engineer who had finally removed a catastrophic fault line from his foundation. It was messy work. It was painful work. But the building was still standing. "It is just rubble now," I whispered to the glass. "Just debris. Time to sweep it up." In the aftermath of a catastrophic structural failure, when the dust has settled and the debris has been cleared, we enter the phase known as the forensic audit. This is not about saving the building. The building is already gone. This is about sifting through the wreckage to understand the mechanics of the collapse. We look for the rusted rebar, the diluted concrete, the cut corners. We document every fracture to ensure that those responsible are held accountable. I spent the rest of that Friday and most of Saturday at the 18th District Police Station. The environment was a stark contrast to the quiet elegance of my penthouse. It was a world of fluorescent lights, scuffed linoleum, and the smell of stale coffee and misery. I sat in a witness room, wrapped in my old cardigan, while Detective Rodriguez and his team dissected the life of the man I used to call my son. The first beam to buckle was Vance. The lawyer was not made of strong stuff. He was a decorative facade with no structural integrity. Separated from Julian, and facing the prospect of losing his license and his freedom, he collapsed within 20 minutes of interrogation. Rodriguez allowed me to watch a portion of the interview from the observation room. Vance sat at a metal table, his expensive suit jacket bunched up around him, sweating profusely. He didn't just confess. He vomited information. He was desperate to paint himself as an unwitting pawn, a victim of Julian's manipulation. "I didn't know he was going to drug him," Vance stammered, his hands shaking as he held a styrofoam cup. "Julian just told me the old man was difficult. He said his father was stubborn and needed a push. I thought we were just aggressively estate planning. I didn't know about the debts. I didn't know about the threats. You knew he was signing under duress, Rodriguez said, his voice calm and dangerous. You saw him beg for water. You saw him shaking. You drafted a quitclaim deed that transferred a $2 million property into a shell company controlled by a man with a credit score of 400. Don't tell me you didn't know, Vance wept. He promised me $50,000 off the top. I have alimony payments. I needed the cash. Then came the details that turned my stomach. Vance admitted that Julian had already made arrangements for my care post-signing. They hadn't looked at luxury retirement communities. They hadn't even looked at standard nursing homes. He found a place in Kankakee, Vance whispered, wiping his nose. State-funded. It is a warehouse for the indigent. Overcrowded, understaffed. He said Charles wouldn't know the difference. He said the old man would be dead within a year anyway, so why waste the equity on a nice room? I listened to this from behind the glass. I felt a cold numbness spreading through my extremities. Kankakee, a warehouse for the dying. That was the retirement plan Julian had designed for me. He had calculated my remaining life expectancy and decided I wasn't worth the maintenance costs. To him, I was just a depreciating asset that needed to be written off. But the horror did not end with Vance. An hour later, Marcus came into the room carrying a laptop. He looked grim. He placed the computer on the table in front of me. We cracked Julian's personal laptop, Marcus said. The one we seized from his apartment. Charles, you need to see this. You need to understand the scope of what he was doing. He opened a folder on the desktop. It was titled, with chilling simplicity, Project Old Man. I stared at the screen. It was not just a folder. It was a business plan. It contained spreadsheets, timelines, and flowcharts. It was meticulous. Julian, who had never shown an ounce of organization in his real estate career, had applied the rigor of a project manager to the destruction of my life. There was a spreadsheet tracking my daily habits. Wake-up time, 700. Medication schedule, bank visit routine. There was a file labeled Liquidation Timeline. It detailed the sale of the penthouse, the auctioning of Margaret's jewelry, and the cashing out of my bonds. He had already received preliminary offers from fence buyers for the jewelry pennies on the dollar, just for quick cash. But the file that made Marcus look away, the file that made Rodriguez clench his jaw, was the one labeled Post-Acquisition Revenue. I clicked on it. It was a correspondence with a user on a dark web forum. The user handle was DataMiner88. Julian wrote, "Once I have the power of attorney and the assets are transferred, I will have full control of the primary subject's identity documents. Passport, driver's license, social security card, birth certificate. The credit history is pristine. 800 plus score, no debts." DataMiner88 replied, "A clean profile like that is worth 20 grand. We can use it for synthetic identity fraud. We can open credit lines, take out loans, rinse it dry." Julian's response, "Done. As soon as he is in the facility, I will send you the physical documents. He won't need them anymore." I sat back in the metal chair. The air left my lungs. It wasn't enough to take my house. It wasn't enough to steal my savings. It wasn't enough to lock me away in a hellhole in Kankakee. Julian planned to sell my very name. He intended to strip me of my identity, to sell the history of Charles Smith to criminals who would use it to commit more fraud. He was going to hollow me out until I was nothing but a husk, a John Doe rotting in a state ward, while he used the proceeds of my existence to pay off his gambling debts. This was not desperation. This was industrial-scale extraction. He had looked at me and seen a harvest. "He was going to erase you," Rodriguez said softly, standing in the corner of the room. "Completely." "He was going to recycle me," I corrected. "Like scrap metal." Rodriguez nodded. "There is some good news, though. The tablet. The spyware he installed. It recorded everything on his end, too. Including his phone calls. We got the audio of him talking to the loan sharks. He tapped a file on the screen. "We identified the syndicate," Rodriguez said. "Based on the voice prints and the phone numbers Julian called, we raided a warehouse at the port an hour ago. We arrested 4 men. They are being booked on racketeering and extortion charges." Julian led us right to them. In his attempt to save himself, he took down the people he was afraid of. It was a grim irony. Julian's incompetence had served the cause of justice better than his competence ever could have. "I want to see him," I said. Rodriguez hesitated. "Charles, I don't know if that is a good idea. He is volatile." "I need to see him," I repeated. "I need to verify the structural failure with my own eyes." They led me to another observation room. This one looked into interrogation room B. Julian was sitting there. He had been stripped of his suit, his watch, his dignity. He was wearing a bright Orange County jumpsuit that was too big for him. He looked small, without the expensive clothes, without the posturing, without the veneer of the successful businessman. He was just a 32-year-old man with bad posture and terror in his eyes. He was rocking back and forth slightly. He was muttering to himself. He didn't look like a monster. He looked pathetic, and that was almost worse. To think that this weak, shivering creature had almost destroyed me was a humbling realization. He couldn't see me. The glass was a mirror on his side. He was staring at his own reflection, just as I was staring at him. "He is claiming insanity," Rodriguez said, standing beside me. "His public defender will probably try to argue that the stress of the debt caused a psychotic break. But the files on his computer, Project Old Man, that proves premeditation. This was planned for months. Insanity doesn't write spreadsheets." "What is he looking at?" I asked. 25 years, Rodriguez said. "Minimum. We are throwing the book at him. Wire fraud, identity theft, elder abuse, conspiracy. And because he tried to drug you with a Xanax, we are adding attempted aggravated assault with intent to cause bodily harm. Given your age and the dosage, the district attorney is considering bumping it up to attempted murder. If he had given you those pills and left you alone and you had fallen or had a reaction, you would have died." 25 years. Julian would be 57 when he got out. He would be an old man himself. He would emerge into a world that had moved on without him, with no assets, no family, and a criminal record that would ensure he never worked in real estate again. I looked at him one last time. I searched for any lingering feeling of affection, any ghost of the stepfather I had tried to be. I checked my emotional foundation for cracks. There were none. The severance was clean. "That is not my son," I said. "I don't know that man." I turned away from the window. "Where do I sign?" Rodriguez led me to his desk. He placed a formal criminal complaint in front of me. It was the final beam in the cage we were building around Julian. I picked up the pen. My hand did not shake. I remembered the trembling, fearful signature I had faked on the power of attorney form just yesterday. That seemed like a lifetime ago. I signed Charles Smith. The letters were sharp, angular, and deep. The pen tore slightly into the paper. It was the signature of a man who exists, who has agency, and who refuses to be erased. "Thank you, Mr. Smith," Rodriguez said, taking the file. "We will take it from here. Go home. Get some rest." I walked out of the station into the cool night air. The rain had stopped. The pavement was wet and reflecting the streetlights. Marcus was waiting for me by his car. He had stayed the whole time. He didn't say anything at first. He just handed me a coffee. "You okay, Professor?" he asked. "I am standing," I said. "That is the primary requirement." Marcus looked at the precinct building, then back at me. "You know, when I was in your class, you told us a story about the Leaning Tower of Pisa. You said the mistake wasn't in the tower itself. The marble was fine, the design was beautiful. The mistake was that they didn't check the soil. They built heavy on soft ground." He took a sip of his coffee. "Julian built a castle on sand," Marcus said. He thought he could cheat gravity, but you taught me. Gravity always wins. Gravity always wins, I echoed. And the foundation is everything. I reached out and shook Marcus's hand. Thank you, Marcus. You saved my life. I will see that Ironclad Solutions is paid double for this. Don't insult me, Charles, Marcus smiled. This one was pro bono. Call it correcting a structural anomaly. I took a taxi home. The city was quiet. I watched the buildings pass by steel glass concrete. Millions of tons of material, held up by math and physics. When I got to the penthouse, the door was boarded up with plywood where the police had breached it. I would have to call a contractor on Monday. I went inside. The apartment was silent. The police had taken the cameras and the wires. The broken glass had been swept into a pile in the corner. The tablet was still on the table. It was sitting exactly where I had thrown it. The screen was black. It looked like a sleek, modern piece of technology. It looked innocent. I picked it up. It felt heavy. I walked to the fireplace. It was a gas fireplace, decorative, mostly, with a bed of ceramic stones and a glass front. I pulled the screen away. I didn't turn the gas on. I didn't want to melt it, I wanted to break it. I went to my utility closet and retrieved a framing hammer. It was a solid tool, steel-handled with a heavy claw. I had owned it for 40 years. It had driven nails into the framing of my first house. It was a tool of creation. I placed the tablet on the stone hearth. I looked at it. I thought about the camera lens that had watched me sleep. I thought about the microphone that had listened to me beg. I thought about the Project Old Man folder and the dark web auction for my name. I raised the hammer. I do not consent, I whispered. I brought the hammer down. Crack. The screen shattered into a spiderweb of glass. I swung again. Crunch. The casing buckled. The lithium-ion battery hissed as it was punctured. I swung again, and again, and again. I swung with the force of a pile driver. I swung for Margaret. I swung for the 12-year-old boy who used to exist. I swung for the old man in Kankakee that I would never become. I didn't stop until the device was nothing but a pile of twisted metal plastic shards and silicon dust. It was unrecognizable. It was debris. I stood up, breathing hard. My shoulder ached. My heart was pounding. I went to the kitchen, swept the debris into a metal dustpan, and dumped it into the trash compactor. I pressed the button. The machine groaned and crushed the fragments into a dense, solid brick of refuse. I washed my hands in the sink. I scrubbed them until the skin was pink. Then, I went to the window and looked out at the city. The lights were twinkling. The Willis Tower stood tall against the night sky, unmoving, unyielding. My apartment was empty. The furniture was rearranged. The door was broken. My family was gone. But as I stood there feeling the solid floor beneath my feet, I realized something important. I was safe. The dead load was gone. The cracks had been exposed and the weak material had been removed. What remained was just the structure. It was lonely, yes, but it was standing. And for an engineer, standing is enough. There is a specific smell to a construction site that has always calmed me. It is a mixture of sawdust, curing concrete, and the ozone scent of cut metal. It is the smell of progress. It is the smell of fixing things. 6 months have passed since the police raided my home. Today, I am standing in the center of the majestic old reading room of the Jefferson Park Public Library. I am wearing a hard hat and my favorite beige cardigan, holding a set of blueprints that are rolled out on a makeshift plywood table. I am not being paid for this. I am volunteering my time as the project manager for the renovation. We are reinforcing the floor joists to support a new collection of heavy reference books. The irony is not lost on me. I am spending my retirement making sure that the foundation is strong enough to hold the weight of knowledge. The young contractor, a boy named Leo who reminds me of myself 40 years ago, walks over to me. "Mr. Smith," he says, pointing to the ceiling. "We found some rot in the support beams near the HVAC duct. What do you want to do?" "Rip it out, Leo," I say without hesitation. "Do not patch it. Do not paint over it. Remove the rod entirely and replace it with treated steel. It is the only way to be sure. Remove the rot. It has become my mantra. I do not live in the penthouse at Marina Towers anymore. I sold it 2 months after the arrest. The real estate market was kind to me despite the damage to the front door. It sold for $2.2 million to a young couple from New York who loved the view and knew nothing of the betrayal that had happened within those glass walls. I could not stay there. Every time I walked into the kitchen, I saw Julian lying on the floor in handcuffs. Every time I sat at the dining table, I saw the ghost of the quitclaim deed. The space was structurally sound, but emotionally it was condemned. I moved to a condo in the West Loop. It is smaller, grounded, and efficient. But it is also a fortress. Marcus designed the security system personally. He calls it the Citadel. My new home has enterprise-grade firewalls, a localized server for my personal data that never touches the cloud, and physical kill switches for every microphone and camera in the unit. I have a smart home, yes, but it is a smart home that answers only to me. If I want to have a private conversation, I flip a switch on the wall, and the apartment goes digitally deaf. It is the architectural equivalent of a Faraday cage. I sleep soundly there. Julian will not be sleeping soundly for a very long time. The trial was swift. The evidence gathered by the tablet, the very device he intended to be my prison, became his coffin. The prosecution played the audio recordings of him conspiring with the loan sharks. They showed the jury the Project Old Man spreadsheet. They displayed the text messages where he negotiated the price of my identity. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. The judge was a stern woman with no patience for predators. She sentenced Julian to 18 years in a federal correctional facility. 18 years. He will be 50 years old when he sees the sky without bars across it. I did not go to the sentencing. I did not visit him in the county jail while he awaited trial. I have not written him a letter, and I have blocked the number of the prison on my phone. Some people might call that cold. They might say that a father, even a stepfather, should offer forgiveness. They might argue that he was desperate, that he was sick, that he deserves a second chance. But those people are not engineers. In my profession, we understand that some materials are simply defective. You can pour love into a crack, you can plaster over a fissure with money and support. But if the core is compromised, the collapse is inevitable. Julian did not just make a mistake. He did not just stumble. He engineered a plan to erase me. He looked at my life and saw raw materials to be harvested. That is not a flaw. That is a feature of his character. And I refuse to build anything else on a foundation that shifts. The money that Julian wanted so desperately, the inheritance, the insurance, the savings is gone. But it wasn't spent on debts. I established the Margaret Smith Memorial Scholarship at the Illinois Institute of Technology. It provides full tuition and living expenses for students from underprivileged backgrounds who want to study structural engineering and architecture. Last week, I met the first recipient. Her name is Elena. She is brilliant, driven, and fiercely protective of her family. When I handed her the check, she cried. She told me she wanted to design affordable housing that was safe and beautiful for the elderly. We need to take care of the people who built the world for us, she told me. I looked at her, this young stranger, who had more integrity in her little finger than Julian had in his entire body, and I felt the weight lift. The money was finally doing what it was supposed to do. It was supporting a load. It was building a future. I have also found a new purpose at the Oak Park Senior Center. Every Tuesday evening, I host a seminar. It is not about history or bridge or gardening. I call the seminar the Trojan Horse, protecting yourself in the digital age. The room is usually packed. I stand at the front not as a victim, but as a survivor. I tell them my story. I tell them about the tablet. I tell them about the helpful apps and the convenient settings. I see the horror on their faces, but then I see the resolve. We are from a different generation, I tell them, looking out at the sea of silver hair. We come from a time when a handshake was a contract and a gift was just a gift. But we cannot live in that time anymore. We have to adapt. We have to inspect the materials. I teach them how to check their bank statements for microtransactions. I teach them why they should never sign a digital document they cannot read on paper. I teach them that saying no to a family member is not an act of cruelty, but an act of self-preservation. Last week, a woman named Beatrice came up to me after the talk. She was trembling. She told me her nephew had recently asked for access to her savings account to help her manage it, because he said she was getting forgetful. "What did you say?" I asked her. She straightened her back, gripping her purse. I told him that my memory was just fine, and if he asked again, I would call the police. I smiled at her. "Good job, Beatrice. You just reinforced your walls." It is a hard lesson to learn. It goes against our biology. We are hardwired to trust our kin. We are social creatures who crave connection. But this brings me to the most important calculation I have made in my 69 years. We are often taught that love should be unconditional. We are told that family is a bond that cannot be broken. But in engineering, there is no such thing as a material that can withstand infinite load. Steel has a yield point. Concrete has a crushing limit. Even the earth itself can fracture if the pressure is high enough. If you apply too much stress to a beam, it doesn't matter how much you love the beam. It will break. Relationships are the same. They have load limits. When a relationship becomes toxic, when it consists of extraction rather than support, it exceeds the safety factor. At that point, maintaining the connection is not loyalty. It is negligence. It is a refusal to read the gauges that are screaming in the red zone. Self-preservation is not selfish. It is the first rule of structural integrity. You cannot hold up a roof if your own columns are crumbling. You have to protect the core. You have to guard the foundation. Julian tried to make me doubt my own mind. He tried to make me believe I was obsolete. But in doing so, he forced me to test my own strength. He forced me to audit my own life. And I found that I am not obsolete. I am reinforced. I finish my shift at the library around 3 in the afternoon. The sun is finally breaking through the clouds, casting long, sharp shadows across the park across the street. I walk over to a wooden bench beneath an old oak tree. The bench is solid, weathered, and reliable. I sit down and breathe in the fresh spring air. I reach into my bag. I do not pull out a phone. I do not pull out a tablet. I do not have any device that tracks my location or listens to my heartbeat. I pull out a leather-bound sketchbook and a simple graphite pencil. I open to a fresh page. The paper is white and clean. It is waiting for a design. I start to sketch the tree in front of me. I draw the thick, gnarled roots digging deep into the earth. I draw the trunk scarred but unbowed. I draw the branches reaching for the light. I am alone. No one is watching me. No one is recording my keystrokes. No one is calculating my liquidation value. For the first time in a long time, the silence is not heavy. It is light. It is full of possibility. I shade in the texture of the bark, losing myself in the simple analog joy of creating something that cannot be hacked. I stop drawing for a moment and look up. I look past the tree, past the park, and I imagine I am looking right at you. Yes, you. The person listening to this story. I need you to understand one thing. Do not let blind trust blind you to the cracks in your life. If anyone hands you a shiny new box that promises to make your life easier, ask yourself what they are taking in return. If someone tells you that you are weak, that you are confused, that you need them to take control, check your own foundation. You might find that you are stronger than they ever imagined. I close the sketchbook with a satisfying snap. I put the pencil in my pocket. I am Charles Smith. I am 69 years old. And I am free. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It was not an easy one to tell, but it was a necessary one. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Are you safe at home on your commute, or maybe sitting in a park like me? Drop a comment below and let's connect. And if you want to support more stories about justice and standing up for yourself, Please hit that subscribe button for bittersweet revenge like this video. And if you are feeling generous, smash that hype button to help this story reach someone who might really need to hear it. Stay safe, stay strong, and always check your foundations.